Hi, I'm Kira, your average Genshin Impact player, and today I'm dropping a Cyno lore video for people who don't have access to his info, who maybe missed a limited time event, or just want a summary/analysis of this character because Cyno has some fascinating lore and a lot of secrets Genshin has not yet uncovered. Cyno was actually introduced very early on in Genshin. He was the representative for Sumeru in one of the very first trailers, and he played a part in the webcomic as well. While the webcomic focused somewhat on the history of Mondstadt with Vanessa and Venti, much of the plot revolved around the Knights of Favonius and Luke's return to Mondstadt. A diplomatic emergency occurs when representatives for the Fatui are attacked in the city, but the perpetrator is none other than Kale, who has traveled to Mondstadt following El Dottore. El Dottore had experimented on her relentlessly and injected her with god remains, giving her immense destructive power. If we recall Baiju's story quest, god remains can be deadly just by being in proximity, and have terrible adverse effects even when being used as a medicine. Kali does make friends among the knights, and it is Lisa who contacts Cyno to come to Mondstadt and purge the god remains from Kali's body in a dangerous and painful ritual. The two were Spontamod students under the same professor, though we didn't know it at the time the webcomic dropped, so it makes sense that Lisa would reach out. But this is part where Cyno's lore gets a little murky. I'll get into that. Place a pin. Anyway, Cyno is able to purge the god remains and takes Kale with him to Sumeru, where we know he places her with Tighnari. Cyno did not become a part of the Genshin story again until the Sumeru Archon quest. Since that was available for everyone to play, I won't linger on the actual plot, but the Archon quest was where we got to see Cyno in his role as General Mahamatra, which was pretty different from the guy in a brown robe who showed up to do weird magic rituals in Mondstadt. Some of the things we learned about Cyno's character from the quest. He is incredible in combat. He values his subordinates and will brave every danger that they face. And he values transparency and trust between him and those he works with, which is part of the reason why he and Alhaitham initially butt heads, since Alhaitham does, in Cyno's own words,
"You keep your cards close to your chest."
Not at all.
Cyno has a strict set of values by which he lives his life. Again, where that trust leading to loyalty makes him a stalwart friend and ally. And when his values clash with the academia, he willingly throws away his title and his entire life to fight back against it. We also learn that he is more than a little socially awkward, which will become a thing later with the bad jokes. We did get a hint of that with how brusque he was in the webcomic, but the Archon quest really showed us how his people skills are in dire straits. During this part in the Archon quest, Cyno's physical abilities were really what the story needed from him, since Alhaitham was the mastermind of the entire plan to save Lesser Lord Kusanali. Therefore, we really didn't see much of the character who had shown up to save Kale. Even during Cyno's own story quest, there was much more of a focus on the sacrifice it requires to be a Matra, as well as wrapping up the canned knowledge storyline. Rather than introducing new ideas, we sort of got a rehash of what we learned in the Archon quest. Cyno is dedicated to his ideals, willingly puts himself in danger when the situation calls for it, but also holds this compassionate side that is part of his care and protective instinct over others. We did get to see the extent of this protective instinct to a new level, with him taking responsibility for the care of the smuggler's sick child. Cyno's idea of who he needs to protect is not just his subordinates, allies, and friends, but pretty much every person in Sumeru, including the scholars and criminals he's employed to hunt down. Cyno is, at heart, a protector. It explains his belief in the 6 cardinal sins, or the concepts the original sages set down as rules for the academia to follow. These rules were created to keep people safe, so following them leads to protecting Sumeru. The 6 cardinal sins are 1. To interfere with human evolution, 2. To tamper with life and death, 3. To delve beyond the universe, 4. To investigate the origin of words, 5. To revere gods without acts of devotion, 6. To attempt the forbidden and fear none. These end up being important with the parts of Cyno's past we uncover later, another pin. But we can tell just how much Cyno values these 6 rules because it was while studying them that he received his vision. It was actually the day before he was sworn in as the General Mahamatra, and a vision appeared between the pages of his book. Ironically, Alhaitham also received his vision while reading, making the fact they clashed so hard during the Archon quest, while having some of the oddest similarities, pretty amusing. Cyno, of course, bound by his values, had to make sure that having a vision didn't break any taboos as the General Mahamatra, but he accepted his vision and was sworn in. This is a nice detail because it does show how studious Cyno is, despite most of the story and Sumeru having the opposite notion. It's more in line with the mysterious figure who would appear and purge Kale of God remains. It wasn't actually until Windbloom 2.0 that we received rock-solid proof that Cyno had graduated from the academia rather than rising up through the Matra via some other route. Though we would find that out once more during the extravaganza when Cyno entered the tournament representing Svatamad. But overall, the more scholarly side of Cyno, the academia graduate, is often shoved to the side in favor of his duties as the General Mahamatra, to the point there will be notes on the message boards in Sumeru complaining that the general is not scholarly enough. Very quickly, because it has become his trademark of sorts, we need to mention the jokes. The jokes are a result of Cyno's atrocious people skills. Cyno does at least have the sense that he intimidates people, so he's decided that jokes are the way to lighten the mood. It backfires, of course, with the people he makes uncomfortable doing a little awkward laugh because cricket noises would be even worse, but that only confirms the idea, to Cyno, that his jokes work. We didn't see this jokester side much during the Archon quest or Cyno's story quest because A, Cyno was focused on the mission, and B, there was no one he was trying to put at ease. If you consider the people Cyno was surrounded by, Dea, Candace, Alhaitham, the Traveler, there aren't people intimidated by Cyno, so no jokes needed. Also, he was in work mode. The other extreme where we see the joking side come out is where, instead of knowing that pretty much everyone in the room is afraid of him, Cyno feels comfortable enough to let himself out of work mode. This is where he tells jokes, becomes Adventurer Cyno, quotes bad light novels, and obsesses over TCG. Cyno lives his life oscillating between these two extremes, all based on how much he trusts the people around him, and how he understands their perception of him. Since the Matra tend to sleep with one eye open, if Cyno is opening up and showing his lighter side, then that actually shows quite a strong bond between him and the person he's trying to make laugh. Due to the limited time events he's been a part of mostly happening while he was on vacation, and he was also accompanied by people he trusts, we saw the lighter side of his personality, though that other side of him is always waiting to appear should the General Mahamatra in all his terrifying glory be needed on the scene. So, circling back to those points I put a pin in. Cyno purging the God remains, and the 6 cardinal sins, where things get murky. We know that Cyno's affiliation is to the Temple of Silence, but just what is the Temple of Silence? We don't know much about this place, and considering how massive the desert is, it's honestly a little strange that it never showed up, and what information we have is mostly uncovered in discovered texts, so information that many players won't ever bother with. Apparently members of the Temple of Silence were once involved with the Academia, so there is the possibility it is an affiliate or subset of the Academia. It was the Temple of Silence that ordered all Conrion technology forbidden to research and to be sealed away, so they certainly have some power. And even though Farazan was trapped due to a puzzle, some people believed that she had been imprisoned by the Temple of Silence, so it does seem that the place already has a reputation. It is worth noting that Cyno has now, by proxy, been linked to Conriad due to the Temple of Silence. It's also most likely the place where Cyno made his contract with Hermanubis, the other big, murky point of Cyno's past. Hermanubis, of course, is a portmanteau of Hermes and Anubis. Hermes is the Greek god who ferries souls to the underworld, and Anubis is the Egyptian god of the underworld and much of the inspiration for Cyno's character design. So the god that Cyno made a contract with is essentially the god of death. Cyno tells us that he chose to make the contract, but he would have had to do so when quite young, due to the events that would unfold afterwards. During the conversation with Lisa in Windbloom 2.0, Lisa mentions Kale and the fact that Cyno was able to help her. We can with almost 100% certainty say that the reason Cyno was able to purge the god remains was because he holds a god inside of him, because Lisa was an exemplary student, and if helping Kale was based on Spatamod skills, she would have been more than enough. However, it was Cyno, with his affiliation to the Temple of Silence and the spirit of Hermanubis residing in him, who was able to draw the sigils and perform the ceremony to save Kale. This ceremony isn't something that Genshin has brought up in-game, but it is still a part of the canon. Cyno holds a heck of a lot of power outside of his vision, and it was that power that ended up causing him, as Lisa says, great suffering. Now, why does she say this? Cyno does not seem to deal with physical pain from Hermanubis, so why would Lisa say that he has endured much suffering? Well, as we find out in that conversation, Cyno was taken by the Academia when he was young. The balance of power between the Temple of Silence and the Academia is therefore difficult to comprehend, since it would seem the Temple would reject Cyno being taken from his home, but the Academia did so anyway, while still obeying the Temple's taboo on Conrion tech. It's not much of a jump to guess why the Academia would be interested in some little kid from beyond the Wall of Samuel, and I think it's pretty fair to infer that the Academia managed to get a little experimentation done before Professor Cyrus, no relation to the adventurer, stepped in and put a stop to it. Basically, that would be the suffering that Lisa was referring to. Afterwards, though, Cyrus took Cyno in as his son. We get some idea from Kave's hangout that Cyrus's dad jokes might influence Cyno's terrible sense of humor, and Cyno entered the Academia as a student, which is pretty hardcore considering they abducted him from his home and tried to experiment on him due to Hermanubis. Here's where that pin where the 6 cardinal sins comes back. Though the cardinal sins have fallen by the wayside for much of the Academia, Cyno is determined to enforce them. And what are the first 2 cardinal sins? To interfere with human evolution, and to tamper with life and death. For someone who was, let's just say it, a test subject for the Academia, those 2 sins would have a lot of significance, especially once Cyno got to a position where he could actually enforce those rules. He is, in some respect, a more evolved human being due to the god thing. And since his god is the god of death, that makes the second sin applicable as well. It is interesting to think about how the sin Cyno was really focusing on when he received his vision was the last one, to attempt the forbidden and fear none. Because that's almost actually quite possibly a sin Cyno committed before he even knew the 6 cardinal sins existed. Cyno is the only character we know of who has made that sort of personal pact with a god, attempting the forbidden, and did so of his own accord, so fearing none. And Cyno continues to exist with Hermanubis inside him, and is pretty much fearless. So is he a walking example of the final sin? I don't know, it's something to consider. Going a little further with Hermanubis, since we've seen how young Academia students are, and know that Cyno was a student, we can work our way backwards through Cyrus, through the experimentation, back to the Temple of Silence, and to where Cyno must have made that contract with Hermanubis when he was only a child. It might have been consensual, but the power balance between a child and a god makes that relationship way more iffy, at least from my perspective, especially since we don't know what Hermanubis actually does. Does Cyno get his fighting prowess from a god, or is Hermanubis mostly useful for cases like Kale's, where spiritual power rather than physical is needed? And in that case, why not showcase that part of Cyno's life more? Will hosting the god of death lead to Cyno dying early? We can only hope that there will be an event that focuses on Cyno's past, the same way that other events have dropped huge pieces of lore about Albedo and Zhao. Or that Cyno gets a second story quest that deals with Hermanubis, the Temple of Silence, and just what it means to house a god. While Cyno can come across either as a terrifying figure chasing rogue scholars all across Sumeru, or the guy with the goofy jokes, fact is, there is so much about Cyno that has been hidden in limited time events, or found in obscure places, and as the guy with an actual god inside of him, we know practically nothing about that. Cyno is a fascinating character with an obscure past that Genshin has yet to explain or explore, not only because of Hermanubis, but because of the Temple of Silence and his connection to Conria as well. I hope you enjoyed this dive into the character, and please let me know in the comments if there is another character you feel could be chased down the rabbit hole. Again, I'm Kira, and I hope you're well wherever and whenever you are. Take care. Bye.